Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. For financial firms operating in multiple jurisdictions and or with multiple business lines, complying with multiple regulators can eat away at time and resources that could well be spent on the daily toil of protecting the firm. Enter the Cyber Risk Institute's Profile, whose goal is to kill as many proverbial birds with one stone as possible, to be one common cybersecurity assessment framework accepted by regulators around the world. Josh Magri is the founder and driving force behind the Profile. Thanks for being here, Josh. So let's start with, for those who aren't familiar, what is the Profile?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast, Elizabeth. For those that are not familiar, the CRI Profile, the way that I like to describe it is actually multifold. First, I would say that the profile is a Rosetta Stone, and it's a Rosetta Stone between cybersecurity frameworks, standards, and regulatory provisions. The whole purpose behind it is so that you can essentially take the profile, use it as an assessment. It incorporates a number of different regulatory jurisdictions, etc., and you would be able to complete it once and report it out many. For those in the United States, I kind of give the example of the Common College application, and I say that essentially the profile is almost like the Common College application for cyber regulatory requirements for financial services.
How did it come to exist? What was the genesis of the whole thing?
So when we first started the Profile initiative, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, and we were starting to see a lot of regulatory fragmentation in the way that regulators across the globe and within the United States were approaching cyber. But this fragmentation was more in the way that they were talking about it and not actually the way to address cyber. So what we were seeing were different taxonomies coming out, different regulatory frameworks, different questionnaires. And this was causing firms to spend a tremendous amount of time doing compliance-related activity and not frontline cyber defense. I know that when one particular regulatory set of stuff was coming out, a firm had to bring a lot of its frontline defenders off of the frontline defense. They were doing like an identity and authentication management program and put it toward figuring out what this new compliance regime meant. And so that set that particular project back by, I think it was like 3 to 6 months or something like that. So we said, oh boy, this is problematic. And we crafted a survey. I was at BITS, which was part of Financial Services Roundtable at the time. And we asked the FS-ISAC, it was a lot smaller at the time, to put forth the survey to see how everyone was doing with all this focus on cyber and compliance and all the various questionnaires. And what we got back was kind of an astounding number. We learned that firms, and it didn't matter what size, were spending about 40% of their cyber team's time on compliance rather than frontline defense. And of course, financial services is among the best in terms of cyber. They pay among the best. And the anecdotes surrounding that 40% were, we're hiring a ton of people and we're just not getting ahead of the curve. So we realized that there had to be a better way. And ultimately that resulted in the Profile. But before it was developed, we said, okay, we have this data, we have this problem, what do we do? So under the umbrella of the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council, a number of financial institutions, trade associations, etc., got together to say there's got to be a different way to do this, wherein the customers are protected, the banks are protected, and the regulators get all that they need. And so we looked at 4 different frameworks at the time. So this was probably in about 2017, 2018. And the 4 frameworks that we saw, one was the NIST cybersecurity framework. One was a set of ISO controls and standards. One was the US-based FS-ISAC cybersecurity assessment tool. And then another one was the International Organization of Security Commissioners paper on basically cyber principles. And we focused on the NIST CSF and the International Organization of Security Commissioners piece because it provided a nice, almost like Linnaean taxonomy. So you go from the most abstract things down to the most granular. And NIST, the cybersecurity framework, consists of 5 functions that then become categories and subcategories. But at the function level, there are the 5: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. But that's not really sufficient for financial services. We care a lot about how firms are governed, the governance of the firm and cybersecurity governance, the policies, procedures, etc. And we care a lot about third party. So did the IOSCO piece. So we took those segments and kind of transplanted them onto NIST CSF, and then essentially created a NIST cybersecurity framework for financial services. So that was why it exists, was to try to reduce the number of assessments that firms had to do to return folks back to frontline defense, and the profile was the result.
Okay, great. So what's the adoption been like?
So it's been good. Every year we hear of more and more firms that are turning toward it. We think that the number of firms that are probably using it are in the thousands at this point. One of the things that we're working on is trying to capture, the actual adoption and implementation rate. When we first created the profile and released it in 2018, and ever since, we've been offering it up as a freely downloadable spreadsheet. And so there's really no gatekeeping, as it were, in terms of the number of firms that are able to download it or use it. And that's still very much the case, but we've added on to kind of our membership base what we call a series of innovators. So the consulting firms, the governance, risk, and compliance firms, etc. And so we've been asking those firms, and it's just started, to report back some harder numbers as to the number of firms that are that they're essentially assisting in its use. But we know from just the downloads on the website and number of downloads on the website, and then various calls, it's in the thousands, and it's used not only in the U.S. But it's used in the UK. It's used in mainland Europe. We've seen a recent uptick in Japan. We also have received quite a bit of notoriety and requests for assistance on implementation from the continent of Africa. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, had been, singing the profile's praises in that region. So there's been a lot more adoption worldwide over the past 1 or 2 years.
So the point would be that it's, not necessarily just maybe to report to regulators, but also as just like a standard.
That's correct.
Set of framework for controls and stuff like that, right?
It's essentially a self-assessment that then you can also utilize to do regulatory reporting. So the idea would be to run through the two components of the profile. One is an impact tiering guide, and then there's a set of questions tied to each of those impact tiers. And it essentially kind of lays out the types of things that you should be considering in putting together a cyber program and maintaining a cyber program.
Just to clarify, the impact tiers, that's to assess the size of your organization, or what?
Kind of going back to the beginning there, when we were looking at the various frameworks and looking at all the various regulatory provisions, we started to map all of this together. And I think at the time there were like 3,000 plus regulatory provisions we were looking at. We were able to synthesize that 3,000 regulatory provisions down to essentially what amounts to 277 questions or diagnostic statements. So where you would have a series of regulators say, you should have a chief information security officer who reports regularly to the board. You might have 10 different ways of saying it across the 10 different regulators. We would say the one thing and then point to those different regulatory provisions. So that created essentially what amounts to about a menu of 277 diagnostic statements related to a cyber program. And we know that there's a big difference between those large, interconnected, multinational financial institutions and then those smaller ones that are providing perhaps more localized banking services. So to distill those 277 into a much more manageable amount, what we did is we undertook something called impact tiering and created an impact tiering schema that we layered on top. And the impact tiering divides those firms into 4 impact tiers. So the first impact tier is those types of firms that if there was an event, like a cyber event or otherwise, and they were damaged, they would either have a national or global impact. Then there are firms that would have more of a subnational impact, so those are tier 2. There are those that would have more of a sector impact, so tier 3. And then there are those that would have more of a localized impact to the economy, and it would really be only affecting the third parties and customer base that they have. And those are tier 4. And tier 1, we know that because of their impact to the whole of the economy, they're going to have to answer kind of all the questions, as it were. But the tier 4s, they're much smaller, less interconnected, they'll have less of an impact. They would only have to do a much smaller subset, about 140 questions out of the 277.
So in order for firms to adopt this, do they need to get regulator permission? What do the regulators think of this?
So they don't need regulator permission. I mean, probably the best thing for them to do is just go to the website, download it, take a look at it. And because we have tied it to the NIST cybersecurity framework, really what it is an assessment for financial services. It's essentially almost like a NIST cybersecurity framework for financial services. And they should actually then talk about it internally across the various functional roles within the cyber IT department, risk, etc., and as well as compliance. And then, yes, they should talk to their regulators to see, hey, if we go ahead and utilize this, is this something that you're going to be willing to accept outputs from? We've had a lot of firms do exactly that, and we've also been pretty successful at educating the regulators on what the profile is. We've amassed a number of regulatory statements of acceptance that have been made public, and if there's any requests for those, we can certainly provide those reference points. But really, the first step is download it, take a look at it, evaluate it internally, and then before really going all in, if it's something that they want to use besides an internal assessment, but for regulatory reporting out, then yes, they should go to the regulators.
You mentioned that there's quite a bit of adoption outside the U.S. What would you say are the main challenges in terms of what the regulatory harmonization push globally? I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that there are slightly different cultural values in different places, which obviously impacts regulation. So, like in Germany, where the focus on privacy is very high, that is a different emphasis and has different implications than a U.S. standard approach. So, what would you say are the kind of top challenges in terms of, especially for firms that are operating in multiple jurisdictions, in terms of regulatory harmonization?
Sure. So in terms of regulatory harmonization, what I would say is we'll never achieve it 100%, but I think what we have been pretty successful at, and we should be perhaps talking more about, is regulatory convergence, where there is a converged approach, kind of a common approach that regulators take, and as it relates to cyber, but without the expectation that all regulatory provisions will look the same. There are key cultural differences, but what's been perhaps notable for cyber is that there is ultimately kind of an agreed upon way of thinking about it. Cybersecurity is generally thought of in terms of the cybersecurity triad of confidentiality, integrity, availability. And so many of the regulatory provisions align with those three things. Privacy, on the other hand, as you know, is somewhat related, but it's a bit distinct, and I'm not sure we're ever going to agree internationally on concepts around privacy, just because of the historical differences that we all face, in different government contexts. But the profile really does a good job of taking what's common and expressing it as common, like here's the way to talk about it. And the best part is, just like math homework in middle school and high school, we've showed our work. So you can always point back to, this is where this particular question came from, etc. And when we did that mapping, what we saw was that the difference wasn't so much in what was being asked for. It was more a difference in the way that it was phrased. So I think we're going to continue to see things like that in the regulatory sphere, where there's going to be this different phrasing, but already we've created an atmosphere where the ideas of regulatory convergence and harmonization are first and foremost in regulators' minds, and they're meeting through a lot of international groups, et cetera, to figure out how best to proceed in a more converged way. The challenge is going to be, moving forward, the geopolitical challenges that we all see, on a day-to-day basis. I think we're at a point in the world where there seems to be less idea of collaboration, and less of an idea of collaboration, and more of a kind of go it our own way. And I think that you might just start to see a little bit of that in terms of the various different regulations, whether they be cyber or otherwise.
So I want to ask about a topic that everybody seems to be, one of two topics that everybody seems to be talking about, aside from current geopolitical challenges. One is AI, obviously, but the other one is supply chain risk. And first, how does the profile deal with that? I know that there's quite a lot of Certainly in Europe and the UK, there was more and more emphasis from the financial regulators on potentially actually even regulating critical suppliers to the sector. Do you think that second, it's interesting to me, we've had a lot of conversations lately, especially in our recent summit, about what is the best way to deal with third-party risk? Asking a lot of CISOs what they think about it, and there isn't a clear answer. We're seeing lots and lots of different kinds of vulnerabilities and attacks, but there isn't 100% answer. Could the profile be an answer in terms of diligence? Could we be asking our critical third parties to be doing the profile so that at least we have that standardization?
Yes, is the answer there. So we've had a number of firms that have utilized the profile internally, but now a number of firms are actually using it for external evaluation of third parties and even in their mergers and acquisitions. We created the profile. I mentioned kind of this cybersecurity framework and some of the key distinctions. One of those key distinctions was this really detailed and holistic view of third party. So we elevated it to one of the 7 main functions in the profile. We are putting forth a version 2.0, and we call this Extend. And the version 1.0 and 1 and 2, we called it Supply Chain Dependency Management. And we really did focus on third party and third party due diligence, because that is something that all the firms care about. It tends to be the weakest link, and it's something that the regulators care an inordinate amount about, appropriately so. So the answer is that the profile does address third party. We've mapped in a number of regulatory provisions from various regulators specific to third party. Our version 2.0 is going to be addressing that in particular. And we have a number of firms that are utilizing it now or exploring utilizing it for third party due diligence. We are working on a project for the sector that breaks down the profile even more, so that we can give tranches of questions to third parties, so that way it is something that is reflected not only within the financial services space, but across other sectors as well.
And you've been doing some work with the cloud companies as well in this space. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I kind of go back, I guess it would probably be 4 years ago or so. When I was at BITS, I had been asked to kind of go speak to cloud service providers because my prior job, I had worked with one of the folks that helped develop one of the cloud services. And we had breakfast, and I asked him, "Hey, can we have certain security as a baseline and some of the stuff?" And he said, "Josh, the answer is probably yes, but financial services, they ask us all these things. We don't know where it's coming from or why, and if it's not aligned to our strategic roadmap, we're not going to do it." Which was a very honest answer. So as we were developing out the profile, always in the back of my head was, we can give them the why we're asking. Now we can show that, okay, the financial institutions are putting together a program that's very NIST-based, and here are all the things they're doing, and here's how it's tied to compliance. So about 2-3 years ago, we started to do work with the Cloud Security Alliance and BPI, and for lack of a better technical term, what we decided was to smush together the cloud profile, the profile, and the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Control Matrix. So we were now able to show where cloud controls intersected with regular cyber controls and regulatory compliance. To do this, we involved a slew of financial institutions as well as the 4 major cloud service providers. And that went so well in terms of how we were discussing it and working together on it that we said, why don't we wade into a little more controversial ground on, who's responsible for each of these controls. And we created a responsibility matrix that you could take these controls and apply them across the various deployment models, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and say, here's who's responsible. Is it the cloud service provider? Is it the client financial institution, or is it shared? So we put out the initial cloud profile in March of 2022, and then Treasury put out a report on cloud and financial services in February of 2023. Since that point in time, we've been looking to enhance the cloud profile, essentially like a cloud profile version 2. And we're going to be breaking down what a shared responsibility actually looks like. So it's not enough to say, it's shared. There's got to be some baton passing. So we're looking at what does that baton pass actually look like. And so we expect various deliverables to be coming out toward the end of this year, the beginning of next, and toward midpoint of next as well.
Is that a separate stream of work than the profile, or it's part of the overall profile?
They're running in parallel.
Okay.
So we are updating the profile, so it's a version 2.0. We're taking those diagnostic statements and are porting them over to the cloud profile, so updating the cloud profile based on that. NIST is also updating their cybersecurity framework, so we've updated the profile version 2.0 with the new NIST updates. We are also doing the same for the updated cloud profile. And then we're looking at that cloud profile responsibility matrix a little bit closer. And then we're also mapping in various cloud frameworks that have popped up, such as the cross-market operational resilience group in UK and the European Cloud User Coalition in Europe. So both are proceeding at pace. You'll see a draft version of the Profile 2.0 toward the end of this year, a draft version of the Cloud Profile version 2.0 later this year, and then the responsibility matrix probably in the beginning of next.
So going forward, obviously you have this next version that's coming out, and then, the other issue that I brought up earlier that's on everybody's mind is AI. So how do you see these emerging issues like AI? How do you see integrating them into the profile going forward? Is it reactive based on what the regulators are asking for, or is it based on, as you said, NIST? I know they're also doing an AI framework. So would there be some kind of incorporation of that as it becomes more widely used and the regulators start, asking about how it's being used by the firms from a cyber perspective?
Sure. So just taking a step back, the profile is, maintained for the financial services industry by the Cyber Risk Institute, which is a not-for-profit organization with membership across really kind of multiple continents, etc. And we have a series of committees that help drive strategic direction, not only for the organization, but then in terms of kind of what's next in terms of iteration of the profile. And so we've started to be asked by folks within the Cyber Risk Institute to take a look at AI, artificial intelligence, and see if we can do something in terms of perhaps developing a profile around that or adding to our profile to account to it. So we are exploring. And as part of that, we talk to the regulatory community and kind of get a sense of where they are, and where they're going. So it's a bit of like a reactive, proactive model. And we are carefully evaluating what we should be doing and what our lane would be, because there are as you noted, a number of groups, whether they be government agencies or otherwise, that are doing stuff on AI already. What we don't want to do is be duplicative. So if there's something out there that works or looks good from a conceptual standpoint, we try to evaluate, can we make it a little bit more user-friendly or implementable, and then we work with that particular organization to do just that. So I do foresee us probably wading into the AI piece as the AI framework from NIST and some of the BPI stuff that's out there becomes a bit more mature. But I think we will be focusing more on the security controls around artificial intelligence more than something like algorithmic bias or even privacy.
Okay. Anything else you want to say?
No, just, thank you very much. I would say everyone should stay tuned, look at our LinkedIn, look at our website for updates in terms of the deliverables. We have really kind of 3 sets of deliverables that are going to be coming out. One is related to the cloud profile, as we discussed last. One of them is going to be the profile itself. And then the third piece is that third-party piece where we've been working with the sector and various government agencies to kind of create a subset that can be utilized for third-party due diligence in a sense.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Josh for being our guest on this episode. If you like this podcast and want to hear more from FinCyber leaders around the world, subscribe to FinCyber Today on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find them, as well as articles by other thought leaders, at fsisac.com/insights, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something.